and welcome back to another episode of Life in Progress. In today's episode, we talked with Jacob Moon of the Relational Collective, and he talked to us about relationships and how to maintain them for the long haul. Jacob is a licensed couples and family therapist. You can find Jacob at relategr.com to find out his full bio and sort of his areas of practice and expertise. And then see some of the other people that are in his practice doing the similar work that he's doing. Mm-hmm. So it was a really, I think, very helpful episode with a lot of great tips on how to deal with, fighting and how to maintain your relationship throughout the years. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, we got into a lot of really interesting topics. You know, it was less about just how do you have the perfect relationship, and it was a lot more of how do I make the perfect relationship for myself, and really just kind of holding yourself accountable a lot. So again, really great conversation. I'm very excited about this episode.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. All right, Jacob, thank you so much for being here. This is an interesting topic, how to maintain long-term relationships. And I kind of wanted to start with the first question of the honeymoon phase. Yeah. How long does it typically last? Mm-hmm. And what do people experience during the honeymoon phase? And then how does that start to transition into moving out of the honeymoon phase and sort of the more realities of a relationship? It's a big question.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I wish it were so simple, right, to like give sort of that timeline. But, I think honeymoon phases are very unique to each relationship. I think that they tend to run a course, honestly, between like a couple months and a couple years. Mm-hmm. So I think it, can be affected by a lot of different dynamics, right? Whether it's like you don't have a lot of stress going on in that relationship, the stress itself is sort of not insurmountable to like the way in which each of them cope, but also cope as a couple. But I think you tend to see like the honeymoon phase taper off when I guess like the feeling of novelty tapers off. So, things feel maybe less exciting because you have responsibilities and you have stressors that come into the relationship. So this could be things like, big career moves or job changes, or having children or adopting children, and buying a house. Right. So some of these like really general stressors kind of contribute to the decrease in some of that honeymoon experiencing, and that's just like your basic stressors. So, not to mention family, you bring family into it and it can make things, even more complicated. So I think it's just dependent on those factors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, do you hear a lot about the honeymoon phase? In your practice, just because I feel like, a lot of the time that is kind of when people really start to look back at their relationships a little bit more. Things right off the bat, everything's fun. We're going out all the time. And then things kind of slow down a little bit. And I don't like this kind of new phase of the relationship we're going in. It's not as fun. It's not as exciting. I mean, is that something that you kind of hear about often? And really, how do people, or what is sort of the best, I guess, course of method as far as like kind of adapting to this new way the relationship makes you feel?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that within a relationship, as those things sort of start to taper off, I think a lot of people do have that feeling like what happened to sort of the way in which we used to do things, go on trips or, just go out or have fun that doesn't feel high risk for the relationship. So I do hear that. And I hear that I tend to hear that in like younger couples. But in terms of like coming to couple therapy, typically most couples don't actually come to couple therapy until like 6 years after the problem exists, right? So, I tend not to see that too much in practice, but this is a common thing that I do hear, that people they miss those moments. And I think the best thing that we can do to I guess not go back to the honeymoon phase, but keep semblances of that is to voice those things, right? Voice how we miss those things, and you know, talk from a more vulnerable level about what it is that partners feel like is missing, or things that they need to feel like that relationship can be really safe, fun, secure.
Right.
Yeah.
You just said about 6 years, and one of my questions was, is the 7-year itch real? And so I feel like that leads right into
Yeah,
that.
right.
Is the 7-year itch real, and how do couples kind of experience that? I'm sure it's not always exactly at 7 years, but what is it, do you think, about that sort of time frame that does tend to make people reevaluate?
Sure. Yeah. So the 7-year itch rule is misleading, right? Because and to sort of like go back a little bit in history about that, you know, statement or rule, is that you know, when we did research looking back at divorce rates, we see a spike in divorce rates, you know, between year 5 and year 8. So,
Okay.
and this is old census data. This is not like updated data, but the percentages of divorce are still pretty close.
Right.
They, you know, hover between 45 and 55% on a yearly basis. But the 7-year rule, I would say, or the itch, is really more of a, I guess, a guideline for the relationship. Like it's not necessarily following time, but it's following development of a relationship. And so, you know, I think around the 5 to 8 years, you have a lot of changes happening in your life, right? Not just as a person, but as a couple, potentially as a family. And so, you know, around those times is when those big stressors start to come in, right? Where we go, okay, we're going to create a family, we're going to have a great relationship, we want to couple up, and then life hits us, right? And a lot of stuff we can't control, and so that can take a, you know, or put a big pressure on how do we stay connected while also figuring out how to like deal with all of these stressors that are created, I think, in our society.
Right. Well, I guess that kind of brings up the next question, though. I mean, as we, you know, grow and change over time, and, you know, we've been dating somebody or we've been married to somebody for all this time, and maybe they're changing and growing in different ways, and maybe I'm changing and growing in different ways. I mean, how do you, I guess, continue to let that person grow and continue to let yourself grow without maybe growing out of a relationship? Because you know deep down that this is the person you want to be with, but again, you know, life gets in the way a lot of the times.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big part of, you know, the change factor in a relationship and it being something that, you know, a lot of people feel maybe scared by, is that they've seen their partner in the ways in which they originally became attracted to. Like they became attracted to, you know, this is how my partner operates. This is how they engage in the world. This is how they engage with me. And so I think like as a relationship goes on, the change is inevitable, right?
Right.
Even if it's not intentional, or even if it's like not the change we want as people and how we're changing, I think as we get older, you know, we're different at 40 than we were at 25,
Yeah.
right? And so I think a lot of us, we don't have that in our mind, like we're going to change, our partners are going to change. And so I think a big part of the change part and staying connected in that is, one, like naming when that change is happening for each partner. And if one partner is not naming it, that the other partner is also there to say like, hey, I see that you're changing, right? In these ways. And this could be things like values or perspective on the world, or interests in, you know, what they're wanting to do in their life. And I guess getting better at being able to name it and learn how to accept the change in our partners and not seeing it as a threat to the relationship itself, right? I think we can get scared when change happens. We're creatures of habit. And so when we're in a relationship with someone and that thing feels good in a lot of ways, and those things maybe start to change a little bit, we get scared about that thing going away. And so I find that the best way to stay emotionally connected in that change is even talking about like your fear about things changing, right? And being able to be in a space that feels really vulnerable with that person so that you can stay emotionally connected, as that is happening. But we will all change.
Yeah. It's inevitable.
It is. Yeah, it's inevitable.
Well, and I think too, you kind of touched on like you start out and you're just two people. If you decide to have a family, you've added a couple of kids, that definitely adds stress. Financial stresses, if somebody loses a job or if somebody is unhappy in their job. I mean, all of that stuff can play into those changes because you got with somebody maybe when they're at like their peak happiness, and then as life goes on, you go through times where you're less happy, and that definitely can impact how you're behaving. And so I guess how do you see that a lot with couples that come to you, and what are some of the things that you would advise couples to do or to how to deal with that type of situation?
Yeah, I mean, kids definitely complicate it, right? Like, and obviously they're kids. It's like they don't know they're doing that, right? But
It's not their fault.
We love them, but sometimes.
it's not their fault, right? Even just on the kid front, right, in a relationship, again, because we're sort of creatures of habit too, like even having, one kid or two kids is inevitably, I think, going to increase our logistical brains, right? We're going to focus a lot on like making sure that the kids are taken care of, that they get where they need to go or get the things that they need. And so it's we can find ourselves in relationship, falling more into that logistical pattern. And so when we do that, we tend to also, fall out of connection with our partner in sort of the intimate and romantic ways that we used to have when we didn't have those variables. And so, I guess in that arena, it's learning how to say, okay, how can I be a parent while also being myself? And also how do I show up in my relationship in very intentional ways, right? Because the more variables you're going to take on in your relationship, the less intentional you can find yourself being because things are stressful. We don't have a lot of time. And so it's just being much more intentionally aware that these things take away from, potentially the quality of how I show up in each of these places. And so, I think to stay emotionally connected, both with your kids and your partner and yourself, I tell clients like those things are really important, right? Your relationship, your kids, but if you're in a place where you're like not okay and you're not giving that intentional time to what you're needing, it's gonna be really hard to show up then in those spaces in a way that you really want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there have been a couple of obvious stressors that we've talked about already that can kind of, impact a relationship that, we've heard all before. I think, kids, obviously, as much as we love them, getting them to and from soccer practice, figuring out who's picking them up after school, packing lunches, that can all play a big factor into it. Monetary issues, again, losing a job, having car troubles, all of these different things, family drama as well. There are so many different things, but I'm curious if there's other things that maybe we're not thinking about, because I think identifying some potential stressors early on could help you maybe communicate a little bit better about them, maybe find out a better plan on how to handle them. I mean, are there some things that you would like people to maybe at least think about a little bit more as they're kind of going through these relationships and through these marriages to, pinpoint any potential issues that could be impactful down the line?
I mean, man, I wish like it was.
Right?
I wish it was that simple,
Yeah, right.
That we could plan and have the expectations to, be set more realistically so that we don't find ourselves, super stressed or overwhelmed.
Right.
And some of that stuff, you can figure out, but that's also that's a logistic factor, right? So it's still logistical. And so I think then sometimes that can get us away from going, okay, how in these moments when the stressors are happening, ones that we didn't expect, how can I get it into a place where I can sit with my partner and say, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, or I'm feeling lonely, or even if it's that your partner doesn't love you any less, you can still feel in moments less loved,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that goes really to then, how do I sit in a place with my partner, tell them these things, express my needs, right, in these moments in a way that my partner doesn't see it as they're not giving me that. But in reality, maybe in these moments, I really need more. And I think we all go through that in our relationships. We need more. And the things I think that can catch us up and get us stuck in that problem of the stressors is that we don't give enough credit to the idea that you're taking one person and you're going, okay, I really like this other person, right? And we're totally going to be fine. We're going to figure that out, right? But that's a really hard expectation to hold, right? Because we have we come from likely very different family systems, right? And so because of that, we have very different languages. And so in developing a couple relationship or a poly couple relationship, it's really about going, okay, when I say this thing, how can I say this thing in my partner's language, or at least something close to it, so that they can kind of meet me in developing that shared language together. Yeah, I often find that the couples that have the best outcome is that they're more willing to lean in and have their partner have influence over what they're doing too, right? They're more receptive. That even when one partner communicates something and the other partner says, oh, well, I feel kind of blamed or criticized, that they could stop and hold that feeling, right? But then also clarify with their partner and say, hey, when I hear you say this thing, is this what you're meaning, right? And being able to really stay on the same team, that this idea of clarification and acknowledgement and validation of what's happening for our partners keeps us in a place of feeling fondness and admiration for that person. And so it makes then the logistical stresses a lot easier to deal with, because it doesn't feel like you're doing it alone.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, that kind of question, or your response there with the figuring out, it made me think of the Love Languages book, and literally everyone I know has read that book. We all are like, what are your love languages? And that's been part of all of my relationships, is finding out what my partner's love languages are. And I think what was interesting to me is realizing that, my love languages aren't the same as who I'm with's love languages are. And so going back to the intentionality, you have to be intentional about, for instance, sometimes I'll plan a date night and I plan it for myself. And I have to tell my wife, I'm planning this date for us, but I'm planning this date for me. And you're going to come along because you wouldn't plan this for me, but I want to do this. And so this date is going to be about me. Yeah. But then I will plan date nights for her, where I'm really I don't really care about this activity. This isn't really my favorite way to spend a Saturday night, but that's how she would enjoy it. Yeah. And I think that was something I had to learn along the way with dating. So could you talk a little bit about love languages and about that intentionality and recognizing when we're doing something for ourselves versus when we're doing something for our partners? So we might think well, I made this effort. I bought you flowers. Why aren't you seeing that as appreciation? Right. But your partner just wants you to pick up the dry cleaning. That's their love language.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this might be a little controversial, but just in terms of the languages themselves, because the research around the love languages is pretty solid. The thing that I find is maybe when we prescribe too much weight to things like a love language, we can actually get further away from like the purpose or like the purpose of what it's helping us do. You know, I don't know that I see love languages as languages. I see them more as like dialects of a language, right? So they're like ways in which they help us speak to our partner and help our partners feel taken care of, safe, important, right? But ultimately, I think like the language itself is attunement, right? We can speak one of those 5 love languages, but we may not be attuned, right?
Yeah.
So if I know my partner likes that I pick up the dry cleaning, right? If I don't understand how important that is to my partner, right? My partner's gonna know that, right?
Right.
They might feel like if I pick up the dry cleaning, I'm not super happy about it, right? And I'm, you know, begrudgingly do it.
Yeah.
They're gonna know that, right? And so I think, you know, speaking that dialect, a large part of that is attuning to our partner and understanding both how important that is to them, but also why that's important, right? And keeping curiosity, I think, in our relationship. And so that's a lot of what attunement is staying in a place where you can continue to be curious and stay curious about what makes your partner both tick, but also what, you know, why these things are so important to them. I think when partners really feel known is when we're most attuned to them because they can tell that we want to know. And so these like 5 love languages are more dialects of that larger language that when I pick up the dry cleaning and I'm very like happy about doing it because I really care for my partner knows that, right? So it is largely about attunement, I think.
Well, I know it can be kind of fun to maybe compare the different love languages with your partner,
Yeah.
but you know, I know another thing that can be pretty detrimental to relationships is comparing your relationship to other people's relationships. You know, I can speak from personal experience as well. You know, you go on a double date with somebody and you see how they behave, and you're like, well, that seems kind of nice. You know, why aren't me and my partner kind of like that? And you start to think, and you can spiral out. How do you kind of move out of that mindset of comparing your relationship to everybody else's and kind of grading your own relationship versus how you perceive other people's? Because again, that's just what you're seeing. You have no idea what's going on at their home either.
Yeah, it's like a little bit like the social media problem, right?
Yeah.
Like we can see, you know, we're going out on a double date with another couple and we're going like, I love facets of that relationship. I wish I had more of that. And I think it's really natural to find ourselves in that comparison state when we feel like those things are missing in our own relationships.
Yeah.
And so I think our minds naturally sort of go there because it elicits emotion, right? When things are missing in our relationship, we notice that emotionally. And so I think when we do notice those things, there's a way to talk about it that doesn't like show it as a comparison, right? I think oftentimes when we do talk about it, we go, yeah, you know, this couple over here, it's like their relationship is so great. I don't understand why it is we can't have something like that.
Yeah.
What I would say is the idea is there, right? But it's the way in which we are sort of coming to the table and presenting that thing.
Yeah.
You know, most ideas are there, even when we say it wrong or we're having conflict in our relationship, there are always like needs underneath statements like that, right? So I think when there are things missing in the relationship, the best way in which we can keep from our partner feeling like we're being compared is to come at it softer, right? And say like, you know, I noticed that lately we're less connected to each other in these ways, and I'm really wanting more of this in our relationship. I miss this part of us. And being able to sort of collaborate with your partner about like what are you wanting out of that? Do you even want that? You know, and reevaluating and feeling like, you know, we're trying to meet those needs together versus like depending on our partner to meet that thing for us, right?
Right.
So I think comparison is normal. It's just more about you tend to see the higher amounts of comparisons when a relationship is really struggling.
Yeah.
Right. And so when your relationship's in a better place, you might go like, yeah, that would be nice to have, but you have a lot of really good things in your relationship. And so you tend to compare less. So I guess that's more of a symptom than anything.
Right.
I want to talk about fighting. All couples fight. Everyone's going to fight throughout their relationship. The longer you're together, the more fights you'll have accumulated. How do you fight well? Like, how do you fight in a way that is productive or ends up being productive, even if it starts out not so great?
Yeah. Yeah, fighting is normal. But I think, too, it's also the amount that we fight is also dependent on the relationship. And so even looking at this like idea of like what's the right type of fighting or what's healthy fighting, I would say that's more like evaluated in your relationship, right? You might have high conflict couples that fight a lot, where you might look at their relationship and compare it to your own and say, wow, they fight a lot, right? And for you, that feels, that doesn't feel sustainable. Whereas you might have a high conflict couple that they do fight more often, but in their relationship that feels normal or it feels healthy, right? Ultimately, what it comes down to is it's not about how much you fight or how little you fight. It's more about when we fight, can we get to a place where we are repairing, right? Can we actually repair through this fight after a rupture has happened? And you know, through that process, can we trust that that will happen, right? And so, yeah, I think when we're fighting, it's being able to move towards repair, not moving towards repair for the sake of repair, but doing it because you know, like the person across from you is not your enemy. But I think fighting in conflict, the best things that we can do is to, I guess, from a very like clickbait thing, right? It's like fight kinder, right? That you don't have things like name calling or high criticism or high blame, and even more so like not having contempt happening in your conflicts, where you know you may mistakenly you know make your partner feel like they are lesser than you in those fights. So I think being able to fight a little bit kinder, and we're not always going to say the right things in fights, and there are things that we're going to say that we, you know, regret. But if we can move in that relationship and that conflict and seek to repair, you know, those things stay around less in the relationship. So sort of in addition to, you know, fighting kinder, it's saying in these moments when we're having a conflict, how do I take a breath and notice that there's maybe part of me that wants to be rude or mean or say something, you know, in this moment to make me feel a little bit more in control, right? And how do I put that right here and go, what is this person really trying to say to me, right?
Yeah.
This is really hard. This is why couples find themselves in really tough places in their relationship, because they can't hold these things together and go, yeah, okay, I can feel upset and I can feel mad and I can feel, you know, angry in this moment. And I can also recognize that the person in front of me, when they're saying something, what are they really saying, right? And how do I like clarify with them? Like, hey, I hear you saying this thing and I think I'm feeling defensive, but I want to like give the chance for you to be able to tell me what you actually maybe are meaning. So I think it's being able to hold those things often at the same time while also like not name calling and making your partner feel small and, not like going directly for the hard hits that we know are going to hurt our partners.
The jugular.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about if you do make that mistake and you do say the mean thing, or you're just really in a heated argument? Maybe it's been going on for more than a day. Maybe it's like something that continually comes up. How can you, like, basically, what's the right way to apologize or get things back on track? Like, afterwards, like, oh, I never should have said that. Like, that was my defense mechanism of me kind of breaking down. How do I go back to my partner and really clear the air so that it doesn't compound in the future?
Well, it depends on how bad your relationship is at that point, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you're in a relationship where stressors are increasing a little bit, but your relationship is generally pretty strong, I think the word sorry can be more effective in those situations. But with a sorry means I also have to like come with a behavior change, right?
Yeah.
So like I actually have to like follow through with that. That if I'm going to say sorry, that means that those things I do seek to change that. When you get into like much more, long-term detrimental conflict around stuff like that, sorry is actually hurts the relationship, right? Because people go, well, how could you be sorry because those things keep happening? So I think for relationships where they're in those tough spaces, it's coming more into focusing on how do we like how do I show up in this moment, hear how this thing has really impacted my partner, and try to help them feel safe in communicating that. Yeah. That is a larger sorry than a sorry can be by just saying it. So I think there's that part of it that can be really important. I think too is when you have things going on for days, right? Which is just, I imagine, just such an awful feeling, right? Because it's like a lot of quiet moments, a lot of potentially high moments. I would say if you're stuck in that moment where those things are happening more often, like reach out to a couple therapists.
Yeah.
And just try to like have a different environment that you can come into, have someone be able to start reframing those words for them. But yeah, if you're stuck in those conflicts for days like that, it's really damaging to the relationship overall. A lot of the research suggests that when we're in fights, that repairs are most effective within 24 hours, right? So if we're having a tough time getting into those places, there's help that people can reach out to.
Well, one thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about is something, kind of generational, I guess, a little bit. Unfortunately, we know the facts that more than 50% of marriages end up with divorces. Kids have been kind of put in the middle of those situations, and they've kind of grown up, whether it's when they were a little kid, maybe while they're a little older, they've seen their parents kind of split off and go their separate ways a little bit. I mean, how does that really impact, especially the younger people trying to get into those relationships? How does that really impact us, kind of knowing that you could be with somebody, you could have this whole life with them, and it could just end randomly like that? Not randomly, but, out of nowhere. For a kid's perspective, it just seems like, mom and dad are not together anymore. So I guess, how do you kind of move out of that sort of thinking that, okay, well, my parents got divorced, I'm probably going to be up next? How do you kind of move out of that thinking?
Yeah. When you're focusing on, or I guess as a kid, right, you see it from the outside, and that can feel really confusing, right? Not understanding maybe necessarily why that's happening. I think a lot of kids too, because they're younger, they don't have a larger idea of self or the world, that they can find themselves maybe blaming themselves for that thing. and then creating, it can create like long-term fears about like, can, I do that? Can I even have a successful relationship? And I think the answer is yes, right? I think it's unlearning, the way in which you've learned communication or conflict in your family, and being able to like explore those things, be sort of honest with yourself. Okay, this is how I move in a conflict in ways that I'm not proud, and be able to sort of address and change those things. But this is where we can't kind of get into that same like idea of when maybe kids grow up and they find a partner, they go, oh, everything's gonna be fine, right?
Yeah.
But like you have a situation where you have parents fighting around the kids, and we pick up that style of relating when we're upset. Coming into a relationship, ultimately is not going to be that easy when we come into conflict then too, right? Because you're taking then two of those different dynamics and going like, yeah, let's figure this out. So I think a lot of it is more about the idea of dialectics, right? That we hold, that I've come from a place that's really hard. In my family, I know that when I get upset, I go for the jugular, right? And knowing that about you, about yourself, and then, attempting to do something different.
Yeah.
But this goes into like the deeper parts of like therapy and theory, right? That we come from a complicated family. Our partner maybe does or doesn't, right? Either way, we have an attachment style that we that gets more and more activated when we get into intimate relationships. And so knowing or being a little bit more aware of what those attachment styles are based on, potentially like trauma in the family or childhood trauma.
Right.
And knowing that those things can be resolved, but in individual therapy, but those things can be really corrective if we can get into a place of challenging those attachment styles in our relationship, right? That we could show up to a conflict that maybe before this relationship, we would engage in that original conflict style, but then we choose, right, in, the next relationship to not do that, right? And say like, I know that I really want to do that right now, right? And we've all had this feeling like, these thoughts of going like, this person's criticizing you, they're blaming you, like just say this thing, right? But being able to develop this other part of you that goes, we don't have to say that thing, right? I can see, and I know how much I care about this person, and I don't want to hurt them, right? And so being able to like develop this part of you that you can hold both of those things together helps also like resolve this intense conflict style that you've learned, right?
What's for anybody who's never been to couples therapy or
I hope you never have to go.
Yeah.
Hope this is the last time we ever see you, Jake.
Yeah.
But what is it like? Because I do think sometimes people are reluctant to go into therapy because they do think like, I know I'm the problem in the relationship. I'm just going to get blamed. Like the therapist and my partner are just going to gang up on me.
Yeah.
So what is couples therapy really like? What can somebody expect? And kind of, how do you sort of lessen those barriers for somebody who knows that they probably need it, but they're resistant to coming in because they don't want to have another negative experience of just another person piling on?
Yeah. I think that's actually a very common like concern or fear is that if a person feels like, okay, yeah, I'm the problem in the relationship, or I've heard my partner say as much, I don't want to go into a place with a professional that could essentially tell me that, which could be even more harmful, right? But I'll tell you, any good couple therapist or family therapist is not ganging up on anybody, right? From my practice and the therapists that I have in my practice, we focus a lot on the relational component of therapy, and so making sure that like the room itself feels safe for everyone. But when someone comes to couple therapy, or they come to couple therapy, and one feels like they're the problem, the other one feels, like their partner is the problem. That stuff, we try to help equalize that pretty quickly. I think traditionally either you've had a therapist that goes, okay, well, I'm going to be objective for both of you, or you might have one that's maybe not necessarily trained deeper in couple therapy, and they might, start picking at one partner only. And I would say that's the therapist's own problem, right? Is that they can't see that, when someone's having difficulty with their partner, that they're in pain, or they're experiencing something difficult, right? In couple therapy, a lot of the purpose initially is to help a couple start to identify the negative cycles that they find themselves in, that then lead to either longer term conflict or less repair. And so initially it's just about that, right? So when a partner is talking, our job is to show up for that partner in that moment and say, so, when you're saying this thing, what I think I hear you saying is this, right? And sort of helping voice what that actual need is for that partner until they have the language to be able to do that themselves. But the ultimate goal initially in couple therapy is both to help them see that cycle, and then start to move to this place where they can see the problem as the problem versus seeing their partner as the problem, that they can start to attack the problem itself and start to get back into a place of collaborating again versus attacking and trying to win, right? The winning part, usually either that's attachment stuff or that's a relationship's in a really tough place. And so if we can't repair, then I want to win, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've stayed super positive, just trying to tell people how to maintain these relationships and how to work through issues. But, I think we should also maybe touch a little bit on when it might be time to say, hey, this relationship just isn't working. And, we're trying to, not break anybody's hearts. We're trying to end as amicably as possible.
Yeah.
But, when should we maybe have that, or start thinking about having that conversation? Because we've listed a bunch of really great ways to maybe help extend this relationship or try to fix it a little bit if there are issues. But at what point do we maybe have to throw in the towel?
Yeah. I don't think we do this enough in our relationships. But I think it's good policy, like once a year, right? Or once every 6 months, like checking in with each other about where you both feel like you are in terms of the relationship itself, right? And evaluating that thing together. I think being able to get into a place and normalize that it's okay to check in and say, like, how's our relationship going? How are we doing? What are the things that are missing, right? Can both get us into a place that we can potentially avoid, getting to that place where we're going, do we just end this thing, right? So I think being able to like evaluate together, is a really good policy. But I think it's also normalizing the idea that if I'm in this relationship with you, and if my partner's in that relationship with me, that we're choosing that, right? And so I think being able to be in a space together where it's not just assumed I'm gonna be there. If things just get so far to a place that it feels terrible for everybody. And so speaking that we're choosing to be in this relationship together, and when we get to a place where things are going really poorly, and we're struggling a lot, we're having a lot of conflict, that we just have like things in place to tell us like what we should do next, right? When do we go to couple therapy when we do have this problem? Do we do it more preventatively, or we start to see things come up, that we are having trouble with, that we can both agree that we're going here to sort of address those things. But when to throw in the towel, that's a really hard one, right? Because I think you get a million different answers depending on who you're talking to. But I think in relationship, it's hard to know when something should end when you are part of that relationship,
Yeah.
right? Because it goes into such deeper emotional things. When you're in partnership, you are willing to go so much further than I think if you were sitting on the outside of it, you would say, well, I think probably this is not going too well. Maybe you guys should think about ending it, right? But it's not that easy. I think people will get to a place where they go, okay, that's enough. And they know it when they know it. We can give objective like measures to that and say, well, you should probably end your relationship if this thing's happening.
Yeah.
But people are not going to do that, right? They go, okay, what's my limit? And then I'll probably go 25% past that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about too? I think we all have those situations where we can see our friends
Yeah.
in their relationships and be like, "Oh my gosh, like they just need to break up. They just need to get a
Yeah.
divorce." How can you be a more supportive friend when you can see the writing on the wall, but your friend's just not there yet, and they're not really telling them that they need to just get a divorce is probably not the best advice. So how can you be a good friend to somebody whose relationship is on the rocks?
I think, big part is, being able to show up in support for that person, but and in addition to that, I guess just knowing maybe what it is that they're needing versus what it is that we feel like they need. And so staying curious about like, hey, where are you at with this thing? And how can I support you? And, I don't maybe like love what's happening in your relationship right now, but I also get that it's likely complicated, right? And so I think being able to kind of show up for them in the ways they need and the ways that they ask, and, trying to just stay supportive in that as much as possible. You can even like, just give them resource and say like, hey, maybe you guys should go to couple therapy, or try to like talk about it differently or with someone different. And this would just be like, you have a friend, they have a high conflict relationship, right? But if it would be different if it were like abusive, right? So like if it's abusive, at that point, it's like, you try to support them in the ways they need and give them the resources when they ask for them.
Yeah.
And let them know that you're there when they're ready. But I think ultimately giving too much or giving, advice to your friend about what, you feel like they should do can sometimes make them hold on to that thing harder.
Right.
Right. And it's a really complicated situation when it comes to like abusive relationships, because we want to help and we want to be there and we want to support, and sometimes that support they're not ready for.
Yeah.
Right? But just letting them know, I think that the support's there when they need it. And I think that that's pretty true about any relationship that's going difficult, even separate from like abusive relationships.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, as one of kind of as we're nearing the end of this, is what do you think a healthy relationship looks like? And I know that that's a spectrum, but like, what does a healthy relationship really sort of entail and look like?
Well, you'd have to ask the two partners in the relationship, right? Because I think what can feel really healthy in one relationship, that if that relationship were to end, let's say, that thing that felt really healthy, and you brought those same facets to another relationship, the other partner might go, that doesn't feel healthy, right? So I think it's an agreement that you and your partner have, and that you're also talking about, right? Because if something doesn't feel healthy, I think our best thing to do is to name it and say like, hey, I'm really worried about this, or this, I don't like this doesn't feel good. So I think ultimately though, there are some like objective markers in healthy relationships. One part is, how much do I feel like I know my partner, right? The things that they like, that they find important, that they cherish. Do I actually know those things, right? Because I think when partners feel like their partners know that or want to know that, they can feel safer with them. I think the other aspect is, if you have fondness and admiration happening in your relationship, even if you're a high conflict couple, but you're still like in a place where you feel fond of them and you admire them, and you feel that compassion for them. That's a pretty good indicator that something might feel healthy. But at the end of the day, I think it's more about, are both partners feeling consenting in a lot of the aspects of their relationship? That can be a pretty good determinant of whether something is healthy or not. Yeah.
Well, I guess, for people that are maybe progressing through these relationships, maybe things are looking really good. I'm only asking this because I just recently got engaged, and, I felt and I knew that I was ready. I had, dated my girlfriend for a very long time. Now she's my fiance. I was ready to make that next step. But I know there's a lot of people, we touched on it a little bit earlier, that maybe don't know if they're ready for marriage, or maybe they think that they are. Maybe they're not necessarily ready for that. I mean, how do you know, I guess, when it is time to take that really massive step and get engaged to somebody?
I think one obvious one is the decision to get married impulsive.
Yeah.
Right. So am I feeling like really big, intense feelings about it, but maybe that can be or feel fleeting. I think marriage is it's a very serious action, right? Because not only from an emotional standpoint, you're essentially making a very symbolized act of your relationship by saying we want to commit to that thing, but it's also legal, right? You're becoming a business together, and so that comes with a lot of responsibilities in the relationship. So I think when we think about getting married, we should probably sit down and go, okay, is this something I really want? And if we're going to do this, how do we talk with each other about potentially things we don't know about each other that tend to show up later in the relationship, right? So this would be like, what's your perspective on finances, and what's your perspective on kids? How do you want to parent? Where do you want to live?
Right.
What are your goals long term? What are our goals long term? So I think being able to then, talk about that, if that's something you really want to do with your partner, a lot of those things, I think if you can talk about those things, it's a pretty good sign, right? That it doesn't break down in communication with each other about those things. So it's hard though to know like when the time is, or if it's right to get married. I think it can look and feel different for everybody, but I think a large part of it is how can we communicate in ways about these hard topics and still attune to each other, and even if there are things that are different than what I agree with, how do I get into a space, be curious about it, and then figure out how we coexist in maybe differences in opinion around things.
Right.
Well, Phil just said
Also congrats.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, since you just said that they just got engaged recently, I think in the fall, was it?
The summer, yes.
Summer, yes, end of summer. So, what advice do you have for him and his fiance? And, just going through the year, like if you're doing like this sort of year or 2 years of leading up to the wedding, engagements are it's stressful to be engaged, and it's very stressful to plan a wedding. So what are some advice tips you have for him just getting started on this journey?
Even just the getting to the marriage part, right, is really hard. The first years also of marriage can be a little bit more difficult because you do have a lot of those changes that are coming in place. What I would say is, at least as it relates to the planning and getting to the actual altar, like being able to work with your partner and say that like we can have expectations about how we want this thing to look and how we get there, but how do we both stay connected while we're doing that, and how do we, when we need to pull a little bit back just in terms of like the planning and the stressors and all those things getting there, that we can change expectations, that it doesn't have to be something super rigid. Because I think when we even are planning to get married, expectations start to become really rigid and really high, and for a multitude of reasons. We want that thing to be great and look amazing, but ultimately, because of those high expectations and how stressful it can be, getting there, we start to miss the reason why we're doing it, right? Which is for each other. And so, how do we stay in that space where we're growing? Yeah, we're doing this because we want to be with each other, not just have a wedding, right? So I think, again, it's just a lot about like staying in attunement with your partner and saying, I know this thing's stressful. How are you feeling? How are you experiencing things? And being able to work through those stresses together. I think that helps long term too.
All right, well, I'm going to end this with my final question, which is, I want to know what each of your love languages are, and I will start with mine.
Yeah.
I am big verbal affirmation and acts of service. So I am the person that wants you to pick up my dry cleaning so that I have one less task
Right.
Oh,
that
that
I
was
have
you.
to take. That was my own personal one. So yeah, Phil, what are yours?
Can you remind me of all 5 of them? I know acts of service is like a big one. I really do enjoy, if I can, pick up somebody's dry cleaning. The groceries, I'm the grocery guy in the household, so I do all the grocery shopping. I do all the laundry. That's something that I, get a lot of joy out of, because I know that my fiance does not like doing any of those things.
Yeah.
So knowing that she is more at peace because she doesn't have to do that, that's kind of one that I know for a fact is one. I'm not sure about all the other ones though.
Yeah.
I know there's physical touch, act of service,
Gift
giving,
gifts,
yeah. Gift receiving, if that's one of them. I love that.
Gift giving, I think, or maybe it is receiving gifts.
Yeah.
Affirmation.
What is it?
Words of
Yeah.
affirmation. Yeah,
Quality
that was
time.
it.
Yeah, quality time. That's
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
one. That's an important one too. Yeah. What about you, Jacob?
Yeah. So quick note on that is like when we're speaking these languages, right, that we're always trying to speak their language versus giving our language that we like to receive and giving it to them. That's another part of attunement.
Right.
My language, it's tough, right? Because I actually really like all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that they can come in percentages and vary. I think probably quality time is up there for me. I think affirmations are also a positive one. I think gifts are probably at the bottom for me. I still appreciate them, but
Yeah, right.
it's not
Yeah.
my most important.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jacob, for being
Yeah.
here. We really appreciate it and have enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, another great episode. Really enjoyed that one. Again, thank you to Jacob Moon for being on the show today and sharing all these great tips. Jacob is with the Relational Collective at relategr.com, so you can find him there and find more information about his areas of practice. And just another great show. What'd you think, Phil?
Yeah, no, another great show, and again, kind of perfect for those February vibes. Love is,
Yes.
again, in the air. So, really goes well with that other conversation we had this month with David and his fiancee, Brittany. So, again, perfect month of shows, really, with Life in Progress.
Yep. And if you missed either of them, you can, or if you missed the first one with David, you can check that out on Wood TV Plus. So go on there, and we've got that on a video on demand. So enjoy these episodes.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.